We are at the top of Kuf Gimel Amud Aleph at the Mishnah. At least that's what I think we are at. Hold on for a second. Let me share my screen and we'll get started. Yeah, top of Kuf Gimel. And today we beginning with a Mishnah. So let's just dive right in. The Mishnah addresses who gets the hides of sacrifices. And so let's take a look. We're at the very top of 103a. And so here's the Mishnah. So Kol Shelo Zacha HaMizbeach Bivsara. Anytime that the Mizbeach has not acquired or benefited or gotten the rights to the meat, and Rashi helps explain what this is talking about. What does it mean to not get the rights to the meat? So kol shelo zacha hamizbeach bivsara, top Rashi, kagon she'ira b'psul. If some invalidation happens to the korban, kodem zrika, before the blood is thrown. Once the blood is thrown, that's when the meat goes on the altar. And so until that time, you're not allowed to put the meat on the altar. And so once you put the meat, once it's able to be put on the meat on the altar, or if you cannot put the meat on the altar, lo zachu kohanim ba'ora. Then the priests do not get a share of the leather, of the hide. Shene'amar olas ha'ish. The pasuk that is discussing the rights to the hide, which says in complete, Kohen hamakriv es olas ish, the Kohen that brings the ola of somebody, of a person, or ha'ola, the skin of that ola offering, asher hikriv, that is being brought, la Kohen, goes to the Kohen, lo yiyah, it will be his. Now, lots of extra words in that verse, and we will be analyzing them over the next day or so. So as a result, if you don't get it, Shnei olas ish. What did that pasuk say? It needs to be the ola of a person. And what does that mean? Ola she'al salish. It has to be an ola that counts for the person. So the bottom line is that if you have a sacrifice and it becomes tameh before the blood is thrown on it, so the meat never had a chance to be burned. And of course, the ola sacrifice, the key element of it is that it's entirely burned, or the meat is entirely burned. In that situation, the leather, the skin of the animal does not go to the Kohanim. Only if the meat has the opportunity to go on the altar will the Kohanim get it. However, Ola shenishchata shelo lishma, now reminding us all the way back to the very beginning of Zevachim over 100 days ago, when we said that if you bring a korban not for the right purpose, you have in mind the wrong kind of sacrifice. Well, it's invalid if it's a chatas, and it's an invalid if it's a Pesach on a Pesach. But for all the other sacrifices, according to most opinions, it is valid. It just doesn't count for the person. Right? So if the person says, I'm promising to bring an Ola, and then the Ola was brought, and the Kohen thought while it was an Ola that he was shechting a Shlamim, so then it's going to be a valid Ola, and he's supposed to do the rest of the sacrifice the way an Ola is sacrificed, meaning you don't just burn it outside the Beis Hamikdash the way you burn a non-kosher sacrifice, but it's not going to count to fulfill that person's obligation. So here we have an ola that is going to be slaughtered for the wrong reason. Afal pishalo also labalim. Even though it doesn't count for the owner, ora lakohanim, it's still a valid sacrifice, and the hide goes to the kohanim. Echad olas ha'ish, ve'echad olas ha'isha. Doesn't matter whether it's a man who brings the korban or a woman who brings the korban. And of course, why is it saying that? Because the pasuk itself says olas ish. So that would suggest that maybe it's only for men. So, oroseyim la kohanim. in both cases, the hide goes to the Kohanim. Okay. What about other kinds of sacrifices? Oros kachim kalim labalim. Well, when you have the sacrifices that an individual brings that are of a lesser holiness status, where the individual is going to get the meat, so the individual also gets the hide. Orot kachim kachim lakohanim. But when it comes to the holiest sacrifices, where no individual is going to get to eat the meat, those hides go to the Kohanim. Kal v'chomer, and indeed you can make a kal v'chomer that they get the hide. When it comes to the Kohanim, when it comes to an Ola sacrifice, the Kohanim get the hide even though they don't get the meat. Zachu ba'ora, they still get the hide. Kodshim. When it comes to the other kinds of holy sacrifices, shezachu b'vsara, they do get part of the meat. Eino din sheyizku ba'ora, they should certainly get the hide. And ein mizbeach yochiach, the altar does not contradict this. Now we will see in the Gemara exactly what that means, but in outline, it means that don't say that just because the altar in the case of a ola gets the meat without the hide, so too the fact that the meat goes to the Kohanim in other situations, it maybe they get the meat without the hide. That doesn't work. She'ein lo or b'chol makom, because when it comes to the altar never gets the hide. And so as a result, you can't use the fact that they don't get the hide when they do get the meat to disprove the fact that the Kohanim should get the meat whenever they should get the hide whenever they get the meat. Okay, so Tana Rabbanim. So now the rabbis teach in a brisa, teach the following in a brisa. So olas ish. What is it? Again, the same line that was used in our Mishnah, but now it's going to teach us a different rule. Olas ish prat la olas hektish. It needs to be the ola of a person, not the ola of hektish. Now we are going to discuss and identify three possible explanations for what olas hektish could mean. But that's one possible thing that you can have to say that the olas ish is excluding. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. That's what Rabbi Yehuda says. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda Omer. Rabbi Yossi, the son of Rabbi Yehuda, says, Prat la olas gerim. No, it's coming to exclude a convert. And we will ask about that because that seems strange. Isn't a convert an ish? Isn't a convert a person? So we'll explain that also. So first, though, we need to explain olas hektish. So my prat la olas hektish. What does that mean? So we're going to have three different answers. Answer number one. Rabbi Chia bar Yosef prat la ola haba min hamosaros. It is an ola that comes from leftover money. So what do we mean by leftover money? So Rashi thankfully explains for us. Third, it's a third line down, end of the line in the Rashi on the Gemara, but it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 lines down in the narrow lines of the Rashi on Kuf Gimel Amud Aleph. Min hamosa rose, to kol ashamos shel re'iyah, that any kind of asham offering that ends up getting grazed. Now, why would an animal that was set aside as an asham end up grazing until it gets a mum? So then Rashi continues and tells us examples. Kigon temuras asham. If you were to, we know that this law of temura exists. We've seen it several times already. But it's a situation where you have one sacrifice, a kosher sacrifice, and you say, you know what? I want to switch the animal and make this animal B the sacrifice instead of animal A. That doesn't work. Indeed, in the end, both animals end up with the kedusha associated with your first animal. And so you're supposed to, when it's an asham, though, you can't just bring that sacrifice. You only are obligated in one asham. You can't just now suddenly offer a second one, and you can't switch it either. So you still have to bring the first one. So what happens to the second one? The second one goes out to graze, and then it eventually develops a blemish that makes it are not kosher for a sacrifice any longer. You sell it, and the funds go into a special fund in order to ensure that there's always korbanot being offered on the mizbeach. And so as a result, it goes into a special fund for which you use the money to bring olot. That's the mosarot that we're talking about. So that's one example. Okay, v'asham shemesu ba'alav. The next example that Rashi says is an asham where the owner dies. If the owner dies and he doesn't need atonement any longer, his death is in some ways an atonement, and so as a result, again the animal goes out to graze until it develops a mum. The shekifro ba'alav ba'acher or where the owner got atonement from a different animal, such as where he lost the first animal, brought a second one, then finds the first one again after he brought the second one. So now that same second one, that first one that he lost and now is found after he already achieved atonement, he needs to now let it go and graze until it develops a mum. De kaimalan yeru v'yimkaru. That what you do is you let it graze, then eventually it develops a mum and you sell it. And then the money gets put in one of the tzedakah boxes that are for voluntary offerings. V'hu olas kates hamizbeach. It's an ola that serves as like dessert for the mizbeach, in the sense that it always ensures that the mizbeach is being used. Delav olas ishu, because that doesn't belong to any individual. Davas tzibor, it's considered a communal offering. Hey, unsacheha mishel tzibor. In fact, you know it's a communal offering because who pays for the libations that are going with the offering? The community pays for it. V'ein ba'alav somachalav, and there's no owner who gets to rest his hands on the animal. V'ein shochta, and lean on the animal. V'ein shochta, and no owner gets to say, I want to slaughter the animal. K'detnan b'temura, as we will eventually learn in Maseches Temura, Daf Kaf Amud Bet. So that is answer number 1 to what it means olas hektish. So Hanichalamanda Amar Mosa Roslin Idvas Sibor Azle. So this works well according to the opinion that says that the residuals go towards purchasing communal offerings. But Elalamanda Amar Mosa Roslin Idvas Linidvas Yachid Azle Ma'ikalamemar. But that doesn't work for the person who says that the extra money from these asham sales goes to private offerings. What does that person say? So Kida Amar Rava, he says like Rava, Ha'ola, Ola Rishona. Now, in a different context, specifically in the context of immediately after setting up the wood on the altar in the morning, it says that you should offer the Ola. The Ola. So what Ola is that referring to? It means the first Ola. So hachanami, and meaning it means the ola, the karban tamid that is offered in the morning, and so as a result, that's the sacrifice that it's intending. Meaning ha'olah, the phrase ha'olah, and this phrase ha'olah is in where is that located? That the phrase ha'olah is vayikra perek vav pasuk hey. It refers to the first Ola of the day. So now in our pasuk, in Vayikra Perek Zayin pasuk Chet, when we're talking about the Ola that the Kohen gets the leather from, gets the hide of, where it says Ha'ola or Ha'ola, so that also, Hakanami Ha'ola, Ola Rishona, it means the first Ola. And Rashi explains that what does it mean by that? That it means the Ola that was initially indicated, meaning it wasn't a residual. That's what it means. And so as a result, even according to the person who says that the residuals go to personal Ola sacrifices, personal voluntary donated personal sacrifices. Even so, we end up saying that those sacrifices were not the initial intention of the person. Wow. And so as a result, they would not be considered ha'olah, even though they are an olah offering, because they originally came through being some other kind of offering, and then got changed by selling the original and using the money into something else. That is not the olah that we are talking about in this pasuk. And so as a result, we can still say Rabbi Chia bar Yosef's answer of saying ha'asham that the olah when we say olas hektish, we're talking about an olah that is bought from residual funds, and the Kohanim will not get the leather associated with those korbanot. Rabbi Ivu Amar Rabbi Yanai. So Rabbi Ivu offers answer number 2. What does it mean when we say olas hektish? So he says prat lemaspis ola levedek habayit. It's excluding the situation of an ola where it's used, where it's somehow created from funds that are supposed to go to the upkeep of the Beit HaMikdash. So lomi boy leman de amar koche bedek abayas tafse midoraisa. It's clear that this works according to the opinion that says that if I have a ola, I set aside Bessie the animal as an ola offering, and now I am going to but before I sacrifice it, I say I am donating Bessie to the upkeep of the Beit HaMikdash. So what happens? So according to the opinion that even that animal can now also get the sanctity associated with upkeep of the Beit HaMikdash, it's clear that animal no longer belongs to me. It belongs to the Beit HaMikdash. It gets sacrificed as an olah, and because it's not an olas ish, it's not my olah any longer. It's the olah. The hide doesn't go to the Kohanim. Rather, the hide belongs to the Beit HaMikdash, and the Beit HaMikdash would sell it and then be able to use the proceeds for the hide for the upkeep. Ela afil amadamar lo tafsi. Even according to the opinion that says that this sacrifice does not get sanctity biblically of the upkeep of the Beit HaMikdash. Hani mili basar. When we say that it doesn't get the sanctity of being the upkeep of the Beit HaMikdash, that only refers to the meat not getting that sanctity. But the hide never has any special sanctity because it's not burned as part of the olah. It's separated. And so as a result, that hide does get aval or toughest. The hide does get that sanctity biblically. And so as a result, everybody would agree, according to the second opinion, that when we deal with an olah that is of hektish because you donated it to the Beis HaMikdash for its upkeep, that's a situation where the hide is not going to go to the Kohanim. B'chein Amar Rav Nachman Amar Rabba Baravua. And you know what? Rav Nachman, in the same name of Rabba Baravua, says not like this last opinion, but like the first opinion. Prat la'olah haba min amosaros. He says that it comes to exclude, that when it says olas ish, it comes to exclude olah that's brought with residual funds. So Amarle Rav Hamnuna Rav Nachman. So Rav Hamnuna asked Rav Nachman, come on, who are you saying like? Rebbe Yehuda, you're saying just like the answer that we gave for Rebbe Yehuda. But you know what? That answer of Rebbe Yehuda, where he says that it's talking about Olas Hektish, and you know what? That Olas Hektish reference, Ha-Hadarbe, he retracted it to Tanya because we have a Brisa, Shishal and Nedava. Now, this is a reference to the different tzedakah boxes that were called shofarot that were in the Beis HaMikdash. There were a total of 13. One was for the the new shkalim, the shkalim for the new year. One were from the shkalim for the previous year. Right. One were for korbanot that you needed to bring a pair of birds. One was for a korbanot of a young pigeon ola. And the reason that those korbanot had funds is we didn't want people bringing birds, because if the bird escapes, now you have a sanctified bird, and all of a sudden that's really bad because it's flying around. You don't want sanctified birds being flying around. So then a fifth one is for the wood, a sixth one is for the lavona, a seventh one is for the gold utensils, and then the other six are so that if you wanted to contribute towards ensuring that there were sacrifices always on the altar, we had 6 additional boxes for that. So, Shisha Linadava, there were 6 boxes for these offerings. La'ola haba min amosa wrote, and it was used for the korban ola that was brought from extra funds, from the funds that were left over from in the sale of a asham, or even and that will, or even potentially the sale of a chatas offering, where you brought the first one, and then where you had one and you lost it, and then brought another, and then you found it. So shelo yehu kohanim zakaim ba'ora, and you don't, and the kohanim don't get the hides. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. So here we clearly see that Rabbi Yehuda is saying that when he said, or could potentially be saying, that when he said that we're talking about Olas Hektish, that he at one time definitely said that it refers to the funds that are extra that are used now for an Ola. Because here he's saying that the Kohanim don't get the hides. So Amar la Rabbi Nechemia says to Rabbi Yehuda, V'amri la Rabbi Shimon. And some people say it was Rabbi Shimon. Im Kain, if so, if you're telling me that they're not supposed to get the hides in this situation, Bitalta midrasho shall Yehoyada haKohen. Yehoyada the Kohen taught a lesson that is you are nullifying. And what was that lesson? This is a lesson from a Mishnah in Shkalim, Perek Vav Mishnah Vav. Ditnan Zem Midrash Darash Yehoyada Kohen. Here is what Yehoyada the Kohen expounded. He taught Asham hu Ashom Asham Lashem, that an Asham, for he is guilty, and it shall be an Asham to Hashem. So the issue is that the Asham is not all for Hashem. An Ola is all for Hashem, but an Asham gets partially eaten by Kohanim. So Kol Sheba Mishum Chatas Umishum Asham Yilakach Bo Olas. So what we're saying is, anytime you have either a sin offering or an Asham, and you end up having funds that come from those sacrifices, for all the reasons that we've said, because you had the sacrifice and then it got lost, then you found and you brought another, and now you found the original, or other situations like the Tamura situation in connection with an Asham. So Habasar La Hashem. So then the meat of that Ola sacrifice is going to go to Hashem. Ora La Kohanim. And the hide is going to the Kohanim. And you know what? Rabbi Yehuda does not respond to Rabbi Nechemia. And so as a result, it's clear that Rabbi Nechemia has convinced Rabbi Yehuda that his solution is not correct. And so his solution is exactly what Rab Nachman said, and it's exactly what Rav Chia Bar Yosef said, and he seems to have retracted it. So Amar Le, Rav Nachman says back to Rav Amnuna, Amar Ela Mar B'mai Mokimla. So now you need to give me an alternative interpretation of what it means when Rabbi Yehuda says Olas Hektish. What is the Olas Hektish that he was referring to? So as a result, so Amar Le, we get the third possible meaning of Olas Hektish. Mokmina le b'makdish nichasav. It's where somebody dedicates all of their possessions to the Beis Hamikdash. Ukid Rabbi Yoshua, and it's like Rabbi Yoshua. Now, the first opinion we're about to see is not Rabbi Yoshua. Okay, that's going to be the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. But let's see what the story is. So, Ditzanan, we have a Mishnah. There's a Mishnah in Shkalim Perek Dalid Mishnah Zayin. Hamakdish nichasav, if you sanctify all of your possessions, if somebody sanctifies all of their possessions, v'hayu behen behemas haruuyos legabi mizbeach, zecharim unekevos, and there were animals that were fit to go on the altar, and they were male animals and female animals. Now, you are not allowed to use, there is a general idea that if you have an animal that could go on the altar, you should not dedicate it to the upkeep of the Beit HaMikdash because it has a potentially higher sanctification possibility. But here a person has just sanctified all of their possessions. So they did it in a general statement. So the question is, how do we understand that statement with respect to these animals? Do we say that the statement is intended to cover everything and everything is going to the upkeep? Or do we say, no, of course he doesn't want these animals to go to the upkeep. He wants these animals to be sanctified. So let's see. This is the machlokas between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yoshua. So Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Zecharim Yemachru L'tzarchei Olos. You sell the male animals for the need in order for people to bring olot. And you sell the female animals for shlamim offerings. And all the money that comes out of this all goes to Bedek Habayit, to the upkeep of the Beit HaMikdash. Rabbi Yoshua says, no, the person wanted everything he had to be sanctified. So what does that mean? Zecharim atzmam yikravu olos. The male animals, which can be used as olot, you bring them as olot. Unekevot yemachru l'tzarchei shlamim, and then you sell the female animals for shlamim. V'yovu v'demehem olot, and you use the money that comes from that to bring more sacrifices. Meaning, the person's intention was for these animals to be sacrifices, even though his original intention was not for them to be, was for everything to go to Bedek Habayit, that naturally he wants the animals that could go on the altar to go on the altar. And so we don't just sell them and use the money for Bedek Habayit, but rather, if they could go on the altar as an olah, they're offered as an olah. And if they can't go on the altar as an olah, we sell them and we bring olot with them. And all the other possessions that the person has, of course, those go for the upkeep. And even according to Rabbi Yoshua, who says that a person can differentiate the nature of his consecration of items, so that by definition, his consecration differentiates between items that go to the altar and those that do not. So, hani mili basar. That's only with respect to the meat, meaning that the meat is going to go to the Mizbeach, Aval, or Tafis. But when it comes to the leather, that's the korban. That when we say Olas Hektish, this is the Olas Hektish that we're talking about, and the leather gets sold for the upkeep of the Beis HaMikdash. And this is no longer an Olas Ish. And so this is the example that is being excluded. So we have three different approaches. So now let's go in terms of what Rabbi Yehuda meant when he said Olas Hektish. So again, the three approaches are an Ola with the extra funds, an Ola where the second answer is an Ola where you dedicated it for the Beis HaMikdash. First, where you have an Ola, and then you say that you want it to be for the upkeep of the Beis HaMikdash. And then the third is where you do all your possessions. It's very similar to the second, but you do all your possessions, and your possessions include animals that could go on as sacrifices, and therefore we're going to say those that could go as an olah are going to be brought as an ola, and those olot that get offered in that situation, the property, the skins that are associated with them are going to go to the upkeep of the Beis Hamikdash. Okay, so we also had the answer, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Pratla Olas Gerim, that we said that when it said Olas Ha'ish, and it's coming to exclude something, it's excluding the Ola of a Ger. So Amar Le Rab Simai, Bar Chilkai, Le Ravina, Adu Ger Lav Ishu. Are you trying to tell me that a Ger is not a person? Of course he's a person. So Amar Le, Prat Le Ger Shemes Ve'ein Lo Yorshim. No, what we're saying is, what is a sacrifice that doesn't have an owner? A sacrifice where a convert who no longer has any relatives, because once a convert dies, if they don't have children, their parents are no longer considered their relatives, and their siblings are no longer considered their relatives. And so, as a result, it's as if they die without any heirs, and therefore, it's as if there's not a person who owns it, and therefore, it can go, it gets sacrificed, and therefore, it goes. We don't. It's not an olas ish, and therefore, the hide does not go to the kohanim. So, Tan Rabba.
I have a question about this.
Yes.
A convert dies without heirs. His property is ownerless, and anybody can take it. It goes to the first one who grabs it.
Correct. But this animal is already dedicated to as an ola for the Beis Hamikdash. So there isn't because it's already sanctified. Maybe it's part of the debate as to whether or not something that's been sanctified is continued to be considered to be owned by the person who sanctifies it. Could be that it's related to that debate. But the key element is that because there's a moment of lack of ownership, whichever way you hold in the debate. So maybe you could say that yes, somebody could grab it and now it's like it's their Ola. But even if that were true, because at some moment it belonged to nobody, now we can say that that hide does not go to the Kohanim, but rather, apparently, presumably, it would go to the upkeep of the Beis Hamikdash.
But why doesn't it go out to pasture like we said at Balav Shamet, right?
Because this is an Ola sacrifice. An Ola sacrifice is not about atonement, or not primarily about atonement, and so. But it's an excellent question. You're right. If it had been a chatas, it would go out and you'd have to sacrifice. But then Ola can be offered even for somebody who passes away. Excellent question. All right. So Tan Rabbanan Olas Ish. We say Olas Ish. So now we're going to have one second, let me scroll. So now the Gemara is going to quote a Baraisa that provides the scriptural sources for our Mishnah's rulings. And we're going to have three different views in our Mishnah, and we'll see that our Mishnah, in this Baraisa, and we're going to see that our Mishnah is like Rabbi Yishmael. But let's take a look. Olas Ish, a person's sacrifice. So, Ein Liela Olas Ish, Olas. Now, the question is what exactly this language is supposed to be here. The Gemara has the word Gerim here. The Masoras Hashas changes it to Ovdei Kochavim. Rashi just takes it out completely. But let's go with the Masoras Hashas. Ovdei Kochavim, Nashim V'Avadim Minayin. How do I know that a non-Jew, because by the way, a non-Jew is able to offer an Ola offering in the Beis Hamikdash? No, and that women and the slaves, or if they bring an Ola, their offerings, hides also go to the Kohanim. Talmud Lomar, or Ha'olah. It's teaching because it says, or Ha'olah. The next words in the pasuk indicate that it doesn't make a difference whose Ola it is. So Reba, that comes to include more. So Im Kain, Matama Lomar Olas Ish. So then why do we have the Olas Ish as a limitation? Ola Sha'olsa Ish. It has to be one that counts for a person. So that comes to exclude if it was slaughtered with the intention to eat it or offer it beyond its time or outside its place. In that situation, the Kohanim don't get the hide. I might think that it would also exclude, meaning that the exclusion includes the following, namely that if you have the wrong intention, Hoel below also labalim, because it doesn't count for the owner, even though it's a valid sacrifice. So lo, as we turn to now Kuf Gimel Amud Bet, Lo Yehu Kohanim Zakayin Ba'ora. I would think that the Kohanim don't get their hide. Talmud Lomar or Haola Mikom Makom. Doesn't make a difference whose gets it, even if no one gets credit, as long as it's a valid Ola, it's going to cover. Yeah. It's going to be covered, and therefore the Kohanim are going to get the hide. Or Haola, Ainli Ella or Haola. Orod Kodshim Minayin. So fine, I know that the hides go to the Kohanim for an Ola. What about other highly sanctified sacrifices? Talmud Lomar, Asher Hikriv. That same verse also says that he offered, and we're referring to the Kohanim. So as a result, that verse which says, again, the Kohen HaMakriv es Olas Ish, or Haola Asher Hikriv La Kohen Lo Yiyeh. So the point is that verse says that he offered, which implies, as Rashi says, top line in Rashi on Kuf Gimel Amud Bet, Kola Karbonos b'mashma. It implies whatever the sacrifice is, even if it's not an Ola. So Yachal Sha'ani Marba Av Kochim Kalim. Well, maybe I should now include even the Kochim Kalim, where the owner gets the meat. So Talmud Lomar Ola. That's why it says Ola, to limit it. Ma Ola Kochim Kochim. Av kol kachim kachim. When it comes to the other kind of sacrifices that the Kohanim will get the hide, it's only when it comes to the most holy sacrifices. That's version number one. So we learn it from a pasuk. So Rabbi Shmuel Omer or Hola Ein Liela Ola. Again, same basic idea. Oros kachim kachim minayin. How do I know? Again, this last question about that the holiest sacrifices also go to the Kohanim. V'dinhu, it's logical, and this is the logic that we saw in our Mishnah. Uma ola shelo zachu bivsara. When it comes to an ola that the Kohanim don't get the meat, zachu v'ora, but they do get the hide. Kachim kachim shezachu bivsaran eino din shezachu b'oran. When it comes to the holiest sacrifices where they do get the meat, of course they get the hide. So mizbeach yochiach. But one second, maybe we could say, and this was the point that our Mishnah said, saying that this argument doesn't work, and now we're going to have a more fulsome description of the argument. Maybe the altar shows that this is not a good kal v'chomer shezacha b'basar, because when it comes to an ola, the altar gets the meat, the lo zacha ba'or, but it doesn't get the hide. So we see that meat and hide don't always go together. No, mal mizbeach shekain lo zacha b'miktsas, but you can't use the Mizbeach as a counter proof because it never gets the hide. It doesn't get any of the hides. So Tomer b'Kohanim shezachu b'miktsas. We know that the Kohanim get at least some hides. So ho v'zachu b'miktsas zachu b'chulei. Well, since they get some of the hides, they will get all of the hides of the kodshe kodshim. And so that's opinion number two, which is the one that we have in our Mishnah, which the reason that how we can learn kodshe kodshim and Kodshim Kalim is basically using logic. Rebbe Omer, Rebbe says no. It's the exact reverse. Really, we know everything else. Everything else makes sense because Kol Atzmo Lo Hutzrachnu El Or Ha'ola Bilbad. The only thing that the Torah needs to even tell us is about the or of the ola, about the hide of the ola. Shebakol Makom Ha'or Mahalach Achar Abasar. Every other place, the or follows the meat, meaning whoever gets the meat gets the hide. Parim, hanisrafim, usurim, nefsrafim. When it comes to the bulls that are burned and the he-goats that are burned, these are talking about the super duper holy sacrifices. Hey nisrafim ba'orosei imahan. Everything gets burned, even the hides get burned, all outside of Yerushalayim. Chatas v'asham v'zivchei shalmei tzibor. When it comes to the classic kodshe kodshim, so the chatas and the asham and the communal shlamim sacrifices, matana lakohen. They are a gift to the kohen. And what can the kohen do? Ratzu mafshita notan. They can skin it and then heat up the meat and cook the meat. Or lo ratzu, if they don't want to do that, oklin otan al gab oran. They can eat the meat when it's still attached to the hide. They can roast the entire animal. They get so as a result, it's clear that they get the hide with the meat. Kochim kalim labaalim. And similarly, the sacrifices that an individual brings, he also gets it. Ratzu mafshitin ratan, ratzu ochlin otan al gav moran. They can eat them however they want. They get it with the hide. Aval ola is the one exception. And so Ne'amar ba, because the Torah says, v'hivshit et ha'ola v'nitacho talin tacha, that you're going to skin it and cut it into pieces. So now what do you do with the skin that you've skinned? So Yachol lo Yehu Kohanim Zakayin Ba'ora. I might have thought that the Kohanim don't get it. Talmud Lomar or Ha'olah Asher Hikriv, that it goes to the Kohen. So the Torah specifically tells us the one exception. And so everything else is just logic that it all goes. And so as a result, we have three different approaches. One is based on only psukim, one is based on psukim and logic, and one is based on only logic with the explicit exception of the ola. So what now the Rebbe continues, lo yehiyeh, what does it teach us when it says that it belongs to him? Prat l'tful yom u'mechusar kippurim va'oni. It's excluding somebody who is went to the mikvah but will not become tahor until the nightfall, or somebody who's still who's already, it's already night, but they still need to bring a sacrifice the next day, or it's an owning, somebody whose immediate relative has passed away, and it's that day. Shiyachol, that I might have thought lo yizku b'basar shehu la'achila yizku b'or she'enu la'achila. Maybe because those people can't eat, either because there's some amount of tuma associated with them or the owning status, but that's about eating. But maybe they should get the hide, which is not about eating. So Talmud Lomar lo yiyeh. That's what lo yiyeh teaches us. Only the person who's the ish hamakriv, the asher hikriv, that's who gets it. Prat l'mechusar kippurim u'tvul yom v'onin, excluding these three categories. The Tanakama nami tepuklei medina. And now 1 second. So that's the brisa. And now the Gemara says, well, why didn't the first time the Tanakama use the same logical arguments that we used at the end, that we used for either Rebbe or Rebbe Shimon. Or Rebbe Shmuel, excuse me. So Milsa de Asya b'kal v'chomer tarach b'kasav lakra. You know what? He could use those arguments, but you know what? Sometimes the Torah will also write it, and so that's what happened here. Rabbi Yishmael, hi Asher Hikriv, my Avidle. Well, 1 second, what does he do with the phrase Asher Hikriv? Because remember, the Tanakama used Asher Hikriv to tell us only Kodshik Kodshim and not Kodshik Kalim. So Prat L'Tful Yom U'Mechusar Kippurim Va'oni. Rabbi Yishmael uses it for the same lesson that Rebbe used for Lo Yiyeh. The Tepeklei Milo Yiyeh. So why doesn't Rabbi Yishmael learn it from Lo Yiyeh the same way Rebbe does? Rabbi Yishmael l'taimei. Rabbi Yishmael follows his reasoning. Da'amar Rabbi Yochanan Mishum Rabbi Yishmael. Nemar ba'ola lo yiyeh. Nemar ba'asham lo yiyeh. Because he had something else that he was doing with lo yiyeh. Lo yiyeh is written both with respect to the ola in the pasuk that we're talking about, and it's written with respect to the asham. And that in the prior pasuk, in Parak Zayin, pasuk Zayin of Vayikra. So Malahalan Atzmosav Mutarin. What does the Lo Yiyeh teach us with respect to the asham? It teaches that even the bones, although there's going to be some things that are burned of an asham, the bones are permitted for use by the Kohanim. Avkan Atzmosav Mutarin. The bones are permitted for the use of the Kohanim. So mufnei, it must be that this lo yiyeh is not used is completely unused, is completely open, because there's an idea that when you have a Gzeira Shava, if there's some logical reason to say that it doesn't apply, then the Gzeira Shava does not apply unless the words that are used in the Gzeira Shava are completely unnecessary in the Torah. Then, even if there's some reason that you might say the logic doesn't work, we're going to still apply. So mufnei, it's got to be free. The lo mufnei ikal mifrach, because if it wasn't free, you could ask the following question: Mal asham shekaim b'sar mutter. Maybe the asham is different. That the reason that the Kohanim can benefit from the bones is because they get the meat. And so as a result, maybe that would be a reason not to do this. So lo yiyah kra yiserahu. So we have to say that in fact, the words lo yiyah is in fact extra. So let's just do the next Mishnah, and then we'll conclude with that. So the next Mishnah says kol hakodshim she'ira behen psul kodem hitlav shitan. So let's just remember what our first Mishnah, because I want to learn both this Mishnah and our original Mishnah that we began with today on the same day, so that we have in mind the contradiction that seems to exist in them, because that's what we're going to discuss over the course of the weekend. So kol hakachim she'ira behen psul kodem lahavshitan. So we now going to say Eino Roseim Lakonim. So this our new Mishnah says that all the offerings where the invalidation happens before they're skinned, well, then their hides don't go to the Kohanim. But what did we say in the beginning of the last Mishnah? We said Kol shelo zacha hamizbech b'sara lo zacha Kohanim ba'ora. That when the altar does not acquire the right to the meat, then the Kohanim don't get it. But those are two different things. Those don't have to go along with each other. So that's the question that the Gemara is going to begin with, but let's take a look at the rest of this Mishnah, and then we'll conclude. So, if you have the sacred offering and it becomes invalid before it's skinned, so then ain orosein lekohanim, the hides don't go to the kohanim. La'achar havshitan, once they have been skinned, orosein lekohanim, then the hides do go to the kohanim. Rabbi Chanina Gana Kohanim. So Rabbi Chanina, who was the administrator of the Kohanim in the Beit HaMikdash, he says, "Miyamai lo ra'iti or sheyotzi lebeit hasreifa." I never saw a hide being taken out to the place of burning, meaning that I never saw an animal after it was skinned become problematic, become non-kosher, and therefore require burning. So Rabbi Akiva says, you know what? We can learn something from this. The fact that it never happened shows that the halacha is the following. Midvarav lamanu shahamavshin es habachor v'nimtza treifa. If you skin a bechor, and we'll see why this is a potential lesson in the Gemara. If you skin a bechor and then it turns out to be a treifa, sheyei oso hakohanim ba'oro, the kohanim still get to keep the hide, even though ordinarily, if the animal turns out to be a treifa, the whole animal needs to get burned and is completely useless. If they skin it before they find that it's a treifa, even though of course it was already a treifa is a categorization that exists when the animal was alive, it still goes to the Kohanim still get the hide. Because the idea being that once you skin the animal, the skin is always going to be kosher. It never needs burning. The Chachamim say no. Ein lo ra'inu raya. The fact that we never saw it is not a proof. Rather, if in fact it turns out that a bechor or any sacrifice for that matter, after it was skinned, turns out that it's a treifa and therefore not kosher, therefore it's going to need to be burned, and it doesn't make a difference. As Rashi says, last two Rashis on the Mishnah, Ein lo re'iti raya, shema lo ira, maybe it just never happened in his days. Shiyim to treifa achar hefshed, that it became a treifa after it was skinned. V'im ira, but if it did happen, usrafuahu if it did happen, he would have seen lo ra. That the reason that he didn't see it was because it never happened. But if it had happened, he would have seen it. Ella yatzel basis reifa hova kodem hefshed havebe, because naturally any kind of lack of treifa status, any treifa status existed when the animal was alive, and so as a result, it certainly is not going to be kosher, and therefore its hide is going to need to be burned as well, and that is the end of our Mishnah. And if you're thinking again about the inconsistency between this Mishnah and the next one, you're absolutely right. That's how we're going to begin. And so looking forward to continuing our learning together. Again, reminder, Tuesday I'll be in person and on Zoom. Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday of this coming week, it will be Zoom only. Gotcha. Looking forward to continuing our learning together.
Is it always, hello?
Yep, I'm hearing you. Go ahead.
Is it always Was it always the practice to skin the animal before the sacrifice or the burning? I ask this because there are sometimes it's easier to skin something after it's cooked a little bit because it's hard to move the knife between the skin and so forth. Once you soften the meat or the animal or the fish, whatever it might be, it's much easier to skin it. So wouldn't it perhaps they would either roast it or cook it or do something to make the skin softer to enable them to skin it.
So when it comes to a shlomim, they can do it that way. But when it and or when it comes to like a chatas, when the kohen gets it, you're absolutely right. They could do it exactly that way because the kohanim get both the or and the basar. But when it comes to the ola, where the meat is going on the base on the mizbeach, there's no opportunity to do that. You're not allowed to cook it. You're not allowed to benefit from it. So as a result, you would need to specifically, and in fact, the Torah specifically says that you separate it and cut it up before you put it on the altar. So there's not that option when it comes to an ola.
What's the benefit? I mean, he's not going to use it anyway. He's going just skinning it to make it.
Well,
Oh, but
anything that
they
you
can
would cook it
sacrifice the
in,
whole thing. No, they burn
anything that you cook
the
it in would
entire
be would
ola.
anything that you cook it in would get the taste of the ola. So, and again, you'd be violating what the Torah. I mean, I don't know whether there's any prohibition of cooking before it goes on the altar. So you're asking an interesting question that I don't know the answer to specifically. But the Torah specifically says that you separate the skin before you do it. Now, if in fact there's anything that you would cook it in, of course, would then absorb the taste of an ola. That taste is not kosher because it's you're not allowed to eat it. So as a result, it would that the vessels that you used would all become not kosher. So that there would be the problem with associated with that. But I don't know that there's explicitly a prohibition. I don't remember ever seeing an explicit prohibition of cooking it, heating it up in order to do that.
So those pots could be dedicated just for this purpose and for
Yeah,
nothing
that,
else.
that you could have pots that are dedicated for that, but you have to be very careful because if somebody were to put a shlomim into those pots, now that shlomim is not going to be kosher. So, but again, my understanding is, I don't know whether today in the modern world when they create leather, do they remove the hide? I thought that they remove the hide as part of the hanging process. When you look at meat in a butcher, right? In a processing plant, the meat is already hide free, and they didn't cook the outside of that meat. So I don't think that. I mean, I don't know enough about skinning, but what I do know from every boxing movie where you see the person punching the hide, that there's no hide on the punching a slab of meat. There's no hide on that slab of meat, even though that slab of meat is clearly not cooked, right? So that's why I think that they are able to skin it before the cooking happens. Certainly, I know we all know from the experience of eating chicken, right? So that the skin is much easier on some level to come off, when it's already cooked. So I know what you're talking about also, but I don't think that they did that cooking process, cooking of anything before they would skin the animal.
Maybe some other softening process, maybe just soaking it in a bucket.
Well, that could be but again, we haven't seen any kind of soaking associated with it. It just talks about the skinning. So my guess is not, but I don't have any definitive proof for you at the moment. I could Raya Ain Raya. The fact that I haven't seen it doesn't bring a proof in either direction on this particular topic.
Mm.
All right. Have a wonderful day. Have a wonderful Shabbos.